All right, let's jump right into this explainer. Today, we're unpacking a really bold premise from our source text, Buddha Reborn. We're going to zero in on its opening chapter, which is titled, Now Here I Have Returned. We'll be taking a strictly educational look at the philosophical structure here, because whether you're a student of religion, philosophy, or just, a curious learner, there's this incredibly structured, step-by-step psychological journey mapped out in these pages that's absolutely worth exploring. So the text frames itself in a pretty dramatic way. It presents itself as a direct message from a reborn Buddha, literally reaching out to disciples across a massive 2,500-year gap. And the core message? He's urging those disciples from past lives to spiritually awaken right here in the modern era. It's a fascinating narrative device that just instantly bridges ancient history with our present day. To make sense of this dense spiritual text, we're going to follow its internal logic through what we'll call an awakening arc. We'll look at the call to awaken, the three treasures, becoming ruler of the mind, the lotus in the mud, and finally, a mission of compassion.
Section 1. The Call to Awaken.
Right out of the gate, the author vividly sets the scene at Vulture Peak over in ancient India, which, is a really famous spot where the historical Buddha actually taught. The text makes this big assertion. While countries, names, and even clothes have changed over the millennia, the human mind's capacity to feel universal truth, that remains completely unchanged. It's an appeal to this eternal connection between teacher and student that totally defies the passage of time. Now, what's really interesting here is the stark contrast the text draws. To actually awaken, the author insists that you can't be swayed by modern distractions. It specifically warns against getting caught up in things like impressive job titles, material wealth, or just the shifting opinions of the public. Instead, it treats these things as fleeting illusions, putting them in direct opposition to the eternal values of the soul.
Moving on to Section 2. The Three Treasures.
So, if we're rejecting those fleeting worldly values we just talked about, what replaces them? Well, the source states that disciples have to take refuge in three pillars: the Buddha, meaning the enlightened one, the Dharma, referring to the universal teachings, and the Sangha, the community of practitioners. The text claims these three treasures are the absolute core of the spiritual path, and that they transcend all specific regions and historical eras.
And this leads into a really unique view on where the human soul actually comes from. It doesn't just say the Buddha is a teacher, it describes the Buddha as the soul's parent. Following that logic, it uses this beautiful imagery to describe the Dharma, the teachings, as an umbilical cord. Basically, it's a lifeline supplying continuous spiritual nourishment and lifeblood directly to the child.
Section 3, Ruler of the Minds.
Okay, so once a person is hooked up to this spiritual nourishment, the whole focus shifts inward. The text throws down a direct challenge. You have to build and govern a kingdom of the mind. Which sounds great, right? But it immediately begs the question, how exactly do you become the true sovereign ruler of your own internal world, especially when the outside world is constantly pulling at you? Well, according to the source, the only way to become a true ruler is by mastering your own soul's movements. The first big step? Severing earthly attachments. You have to let go of that obsession with status and wealth we touched on earlier. By doing this, you're essentially refusing to let external, worldly values dictate your internal peace. And that's what allows you to achieve total mental sovereignty. And the actual mechanism for doing this, the author explains, is constant, rigorous self-reflection. Specifically, a kind of reflection based on the traditional Buddhist framework of the Eightfold Path. The text frames this not just as passive meditation, but as active work. It's a method to systematically erase internal evil and temper the mind. Think of it almost like building and strengthening your spiritual muscle.
Which brings us to Section 4, the lotus in the mud.
All right, having established this strong, purified internal kingdom, the narrative zooms back out to the external world, and it uses a really striking visual metaphor to do it. The text describes this foul, impure swamp. It's filled with muddy water, bad odors, but then it notes that the lotus flower doesn't avoid this environment. No, it willingly plants its seeds right there in the filth so it can bloom into something breathtakingly beautiful. Impartially speaking, this serves as just an incredibly powerful allegory for the human condition. The muddy swamp directly represents our modern world, right? A society full of hardships, temptations, noise, and in contrast, the lotus represents that purified soul we just talked about building. So, the absolutely crucial takeaway here is that the text does not tell its disciples to run away, hide in the mountains, or escape the corrupt world. Not at all. It commands them to exist right in the middle of it. You're supposed to embrace that muddy environment, extend a clean, uncorrupted stem upward, and manifest rare spiritual beauty right smack in the middle of the chaos.
Finally, Section 5, a mission of compassion.
But why do we do this? Why bother blooming in the mud? The author introduces another beautiful metaphor to explain it, the concept of spiritual groundwater. The text explains that when you selflessly try to quench the spiritual thirst of other people, an endless supply of courage, love, and light will spring forth from inside of you. It's kind of like tapping into this infinite underground well of the Buddha's love. Ultimately, the argument here is that building your kingdom of the mind and severing your attachments is definitely not a selfish endeavor. You aren't just purifying yourself for your own personal peace. It's a strictly necessary step to get the strength and stability you need to save others in a really difficult, swamp-like world. Your self-mastery is literally the tool used for global compassion. As we wrap up this explainer, the structure of Buddha Reborn leaves us with a pretty compelling philosophical challenge, completely regardless of your own personal spiritual beliefs. If we accept that modern society can often be a muddy swamp, how can we cultivate our own inner tranquility and strength to bring something beautiful and helpful into an increasingly chaotic world? It's definitely a question worth reflecting on today.
Let's dive right into this explainer. Today, we're exploring some absolutely profound teachings from the Words of Wisdom chapter on how to navigate the absolute highest peaks and the lowest valleys of human life. You can think of this material as a survival guide for the human soul. It literally charts out how to handle everything from that massive, ego-boosting success we all crave to devastating, seemingly hopeless failure. It's an incredible journey, so let's just get right into it.
So, how do you navigate life when your mind constantly swings left and right? You know the feeling, right? One day you're up, the next you're totally down. The text points out our human tendency to become completely disoriented by our shifting circumstances, pushed and pulled by whatever's happening in the moment. Things go well, we veer wildly in one direction. They go poorly, we swing completely the opposite way. Honestly, it's an exhausting way to live, isn't it?
To anchor ourselves against all that constant swinging back and forth, the source material offers this brilliant physical metaphor. It urges us to use the Buddha's words as a guiding compass. Think about it. Just like a traveler in the ancient world relied on the North Star to avoid, wandering off a cliff in the dark, we desperately need an internal, unchanging point of reference. We need it so we never lose our true direction. This compass is made of words of wisdom, teachings that keep us steady regardless of what the weather's doing outside.
Which brings us to Section 1, the trap of arrogance, and how we navigate success.
Now, human beings naturally default to arrogance during prosperous times. When things are going perfectly, it is incredibly easy to overestimate your own power. We've all been there. You start claiming all those brilliant results as entirely your own doing. Well, the source warns that this is a dangerous illusion. To combat this, we need a safety mechanism, engraving words of self-admonition into our hearts. Essentially, this means actively, daily, reminding yourself to stay grounded, precisely when you feel like you're sitting on top of the world. The crucial point here is that hoarding the credit for your victories actually disconnects you from the reality of how success works. When you expand your ego to the point of arrogance, you completely lose sight of the immense support you receive from others and from the greater forces of life itself. The text stresses that prosperity is actually a test. If you overvalue your own abilities and forget gratitude, that peak of success, it quickly becomes a cliff edge you're about to fall right over.
But what happens when we fall? Let's look at Section 2, Hardships as Soul Whetstones, where we're reframing hardships.
This is where the teachings get incredibly empowering. The text radically reframes human suffering, stating unequivocally that failure, frustration, and misfortune are not random punishments. No, instead, they exist solely as a whetstone to polish your soul. Think about how a dull blade is sharpened. It has to be violently ground against a hard, rough stone. Sparks fly, metal is scraped away. It looks destructive, sure, but it is literally the only way the blade becomes sharp and useful.
The author even uses the modern equivalent, sandpaper. By looking at difficulties as sandpaper meant to refine us, we realize that the friction we're experiencing is actually a preparation phase. We aren't being ground down into dust. Our inner light is just being polished so it can shine brighter. When you view your current hardships through this lens, you realize you're not at a dead end at all.
Actually, scratch that, you're preparing to enter a golden path of growth.
And this leads to one of the most uplifting takeaways in the entire source. Because we are part of a greater, eternal life, described here as being part of the Buddha's great life force, permanent defeat is simply an illusion. There's no absolute bottom. As long as we learn the lesson, as long as we let that sandpaper do its work, we will rise again. There is truly no such thing as failure or the bottom of misfortune in this world.
Moving on to Section 3, Walking the Middle Way, which the text calls the Royal Road. Okay, let's dive into the ultimate solution presented in the text, Walking the Middle Way. Now, this isn't just about playing it safe. It's described as the absolute royal road of life. It's a path that requires you to remain remarkably humble, unpretentious, and deeply grateful to others and the Buddha, regardless of your external circumstances. Walking the middle way ensures that your success is actually sustainable. It's a shared phenomenon, not a solo act. There is a very sharp dividing line between what the text considers false success and true success. If your victory causes another's downfall, or if your wealth requires someone else's injury or misfortune, you've strayed entirely from the middle way. True success is defined as a path that brings life to all people without exception. It's a total win-win scenario on a spiritual level.
And that leads us perfectly into Section 4, the harvest of altruism and returning the joy.
So what do we do when we achieve that true success? The crucial point is that true cultivation is rooted entirely in love and altruism. The happiness you obtain on the middle way is not yours alone. It must be returned to the many people around you. Personal joy is meant to be a tool to uplift and save others. If you just lock the rewards away in a vault for yourself, the source material warns you are missing the entire point of the journey.
This builds into a really beautiful, continuous sequence of action. First, you cultivate your own field diligently. That's your personal development, your hard work. Second, you harvest the abundant fruit, the wheat, the rice. But the final, absolute most important step is distribution. You don't build a massive, thriving agricultural field just to hoard the grain in your own kitchen, right? You build it to feed the entire village.
The text makes a very realistic note here too. Even if you face jealousy, criticism, or people mocking your ideals while you are doing the hard work of building your field, you absolutely must persist. Because giving away the fruits of your labor, distributing that harvest, is the very essence of existence. It's the definition of active love, and for sure it's the absolute secret to sustaining true success in your life.
As we wrap up this explainer, I want you to look at your own internal compass. Examine the path you're currently walking, whether you feel like you're standing on a mountaintop right now or grinding against the sandpaper down in a valley. Ask yourself this one vital question. Is your success bringing life to all? Are you hoarding your harvest or are you feeding the village? It's a provocative thought to leave you with, but answering it honestly might just be the absolute key to finding your true North Star. Thanks for learning with me today, and keep walking that middle way.
Welcome back to the Explainer. Today we're jumping right into a really profound text that exposes the hidden spiritual poisons of modern life, and more importantly, the path to an enlightened mind. We're breaking down a fascinating chapter called Do Not Be Foolish. It's basically a stark warning about the dangers of chasing endless ambitions, and it gives us the ultimate cure for that constant inner restlessness we all feel sometimes.
Right out of the gate, the text hits us with this totally startling metaphor. You are unknowingly eating poison every day, drinking the poison of arsenic. Wow, right? It's saying we are slowly killing our souls without even realizing it. Think about it. If we ate actual poisoned food, our physical bodies would react instantly. So why are we completely blind to the fact that our souls are currently drinking toxins? So what exactly is this spiritual poison, and how does it lead to what the text calls the death of the soul? Now, this doesn't mean a physical end. It's actually about losing your original divine nature. It's what happens when we settle for a way of life that completely contradicts the very purpose we were created for. Let's dive in and uncover exactly what this toxic substance is.
Section 1. The Hidden Daily Poison and the Death of the Soul.
To really grasp what this poison is, we first have to redefine the word foolishness. According to the source, a foolish person isn't someone lacking intelligence. Nope, it's someone who is completely disconnected from what their soul genuinely needs. You could literally be climbing the corporate ladder, winning awards, and looking like an absolute genius to the outside world, while being entirely foolish to your soul's true purpose. Foolishness here is strictly defined as a profound ignorance of your own inner self. And here we see the core toxin perfectly illustrated: greed. The text compares it to a starving ghost. Imagine a ghost whose empty stomach can literally never be satisfied, no matter how much it eats. We're warned to completely cast away this mindset, that endless voice saying, "I want this and I want that too." Because wrapped up in this greed is the insatiable desire for endless status, worldly success, and honor. It's a vicious cycle, you know. The more you consume, the emptier you feel. Which leads us to Section 2, the trap of self-preservation, a spiritual starvation. The text draws a really sharp contrast here. It warns that dedicating your life to chasing status, honor, and worldly success is actually a form of spiritual starvation. People who are desperately working just for their own self-preservation think they're surviving, right? But they are doing the exact opposite. They've drifted completely off the true spiritual path. And here's the ultimate irony the source presents. The aggressive pursuit of self-preservation is the exact thing that destroys the soul's true nature. When your sole focus is on protecting yourself, advancing your own career, and feeding your own ego, well, you're drinking that daily dose of arsenic. As the quote says, trying to keep only oneself alive actually kills oneself. It's a powerful paradox that really makes you stop and reevaluate your daily motivations. Moving on to Section 3, toxic emotions and spiritual ailments.
Beyond just material greed, the author categorizes everyday negative emotions as deeply toxic. Harboring anger, clinging to jealousy, spreading dissatisfaction, these aren't just bad habits. They are literally described as demonic acts that rot your soul and drag others down with you. Anger is unacceptable. Jealousy is strictly forbidden. And from those unsatisfied desires comes complaining, which acts like a contagious disease, spreading to everyone around you. These are severe spiritual ailments.
In fact, there is a very strict warning here about how we influence others. Distorting teachings or leading sincere people astray just to justify your own ego is considered a grave sin. Think about it this way. While physical violence hurts the body, confusing the minds of earnest people, twisting truth to justify your own actions rots the souls of others. It acts as a toxic force multiplier in the world and leads straight to spiritual ruin.
So, Section 4, the core Buddhist teaching and the ultimate antidote.
If greed and self-preservation are the poison, what exactly is the antidote? The source states it unequivocally. Without the genuine desire to serve and give love to others, Buddhist teachings hold absolutely no meaning. If your desire to take and greedily consume is strong, well, that is the definition of foolishness. We have to stop clinging to status and reputation and instead realize that the very foundation of a spiritual life is serving people. This brings us to a really profound reminder. You did not receive the gift of life in this world merely to use it for yourself. Look at your life with immense gratitude and use it to nourish the hearts of others. If you obsess excessively over your own personal happiness, that mindset, paradoxically, pushes true happiness away. Let's look at Section 5, the enlightened mind and finding deep peace. Unlike the foolish person desperately chasing validation, the enlightened individual is defined by a gentle humility. They are completely free from the need for self-display or judging others. They're quiet, they don't cling to pride, and they don't have that burning desire to constantly assert their authority. Because they know themselves deeply and have mastered their own minds, they literally have absolutely no need to loudly broadcast their virtues to the world. The text beautifully describes this peaceful state as the scent of enlightenment. As your soul begins to truly shine, a distinct fragrance drifts from you. But here's the catch. You cannot obtain this scent by trying to grab it. You can't violently seize it or steal it. It only comes naturally when you completely let go of that grasping, demanding mindset. The source uses this striking metaphor. Think of it like a butterfly. If you chase a butterfly with the net, it flies high away. If you aggressively run after spiritual peace, worldly honor, or enlightenment with a net, trying to force it into your possession, it just escapes into the sky. It's only when you are completely still, when you've abandoned that toxic greed and dedicated yourself to serving others, that the butterfly gently lands right on your shoulder.
Finally, Section 6, navigating your desires and the final choice.
As we wrap up this explainer, we're left to evaluate how we navigate our own daily lives and ambitions. Next time you feel the urge to chase endless status, or you catch yourself harboring jealousy, ask yourself, are you feeding the starving ghost, or are you serving the soul? Are you unwittingly drinking the poison,
Or are you ready to embrace the peaceful path of serving others? We have that choice every single day. Thanks for joining me, and I hope this deep dive helps you find clarity on your own journey.
Welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into something really fascinating. We're going to explore how a spiritual text actually proposes some profound structural solutions for modern society's biggest economic and political issues. It's all about how ancient philosophies can be directly applied to our modern world. Let's get right into it. So the source material we're examining today is this book, The Rebirth of Buddha, and we're zeroing right in on Chapter 4. This chapter outlines an alternative, completely holistic framework for economics and political governance, all based on Buddhist truth. We'll be taking an objective look at exactly how this text structures its arguments for building a better functioning society.
Okay, here's our roadmap for today. First up, true right livelihood. Second, saws, planes, and chisels. Third, middle way politics. And finally, a vision for the world.
All right, Section 1, True Right Livelihood, the Economics of the Individual. The text kicks things off with this foundational concept called true right livelihood, and it defines this as enriching yourself in a way that simultaneously enriches others, society, and really the nation as a whole. Now, the absolutely crucial thing to understand here is that according to this text, personal wealth and societal benefit, they aren't at odds. They're not mutually exclusive at all. Instead, they're deeply connected. The source material actually draws a pretty stark contrast here. On the one hand, you have selfish economic pursuits, chasing money just for money's sake. But the alternative is what it calls a spiritual economic pursuit. In this framework, true wealth is seen as a natural byproduct of helping people. The philosophy argues that the actual value of your work is measured directly by how useful it is to others. So the point it drives home is this, and it's a bit provocative. It asks readers to really look inward at their own careers. The text suggests that, hey, if you're currently struggling financially, you might want to ask yourself, is it because my work isn't truly enriching other people? It kind of holds a mirror up to our daily grind, right? Proposing that true financial value is a direct reflection of how genuinely helpful we are to our community.
Moving right along to Section 2, saws, planes, and chisels. Finding your designated role.
I love this part. Let's break down this carpenter's workshop metaphor. The book categorizes human talents into different types of tools. You've got the saw, which is meant for cutting wood, right? That requires a bold, decisive, rapid personality. Then there's the plane, used for smoothing the wood. That requires meticulous service and really close attention to detail. And the chisel grooves the wood, representing highly specialized, narrow but super powerful skills. The core message here is that every single tool has a distinct, vital role, and each one finds its own unique joy in fulfilling that exact purpose. Now, what's really interesting here is an explicit warning the text gives. It points out that society tends to glorify the saw, the bold, standout, fast-moving leader. And because of that pressure, suddenly everybody wants to be a saw. But the text argues that, well, not everyone is suited for that role. If you're naturally a methodical, service-oriented plane, trying to force yourself to act like a rapid-fire saw goes completely against your own nature.
And that leads us straight into the danger of envy. The text makes it crystal clear society absolutely needs diverse talents to function. I mean, you can't build a house using nothing but a saw. Envy just disrupts this whole economic and social harmony. A plane trying to be a saw doesn't just fail, it actually ruins the wood. True joy, both economically and personally, comes from recognizing your own traits and fulfilling your role without envying what everyone else is doing.
All right, scaling up now. Section 3, Middle Way Politics, Governing the State. Here we encounter a really fascinating concept the book calls the middle way of the state. So the text takes the idea of the middle way, which historically is this personal, psychological practice of avoiding extremes, and it expands it into a grand political theory. It defines it as a principle of governance that totally discards extreme selfishness, focusing entirely on harmony and mutual prosperity for every single citizen. We actually find a very direct critique of modern democracy here. The book describes current political systems as being completely bogged down by partisan clashes, gridlock, and mooring self-interests. In contrast to that, the text envisions this ideal governance where leaders are governing solely for the happiness of the people. It's basically pointing out that modern politics often loses the forest for the trees, focusing way more on winning the political fight rather than actually serving the public.
To resolve this gridlock, the text insists that true political leadership needs to entirely abandon these petty party disputes. Instead, it suggests that leaders from all sides should be coming together with genuine proposals, focusing on one single question: how do we make the public wealthy and happy? It's all about stripping away the ego to govern from a place of unified service.
Which brings us to the final scale, Section 4, A Vision for the World, Global Relations and Grand Love. The text takes a very firm, logical stance against isolationism and narrow-minded national self-interest. It argues, and I'll quote, "If only your own country prospers while others steadily decline, international trade will eventually cease to exist. Simply put, you just cannot succeed in a vacuum." This specific passage dives into international friction, taking that same middle way concept and applying it directly to global trade. The text demands that countries look beyond their own borders. Think about it. If a nation only seeks to extract wealth and completely ignores the declining economies of its trade partners, the entire global system is eventually going to collapse. So, what's the proposed solution for global harmony? The text outlines what it calls the international middle way. It asks nations to abandon narrow self-interest and instead embrace a spirit of grand love and gratitude. Crucially, it states that advanced nations have a fundamental duty to guide and mentor developing ones, and they have to do this without the constant fear of being overtaken by their rivals. Acting out of fearful self-preservation only hinders global progress. Ultimately, we must prosper together. When we zoom out and look at the big picture, we can really see how this philosophy builds into an expanding circle. It starts right at step 1 with individual fulfillment through true right livelihood. That scales up to step 2, national harmony through middle way politics. And finally, it reaches step 3, global prosperity through grand love and trade. It's a beautifully unified system that scales perfectly from the lone carpenter's bench all the way up to the entire globe. Which leaves us with this final provocative thought to chew on. If the world is a workshop, what tool are you? And are you using it to enrich the whole? It's a really powerful way to turn these vast political and economic theories directly back to your own personal life and career. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep learning, keep growing, and go find your designated role.
Hey everyone, welcome to today's explainer. If you've ever felt that burning, tight-chested anxiety of modern hustle culture, that constant nagging feeling that you just aren't moving fast enough or achieving things quickly enough, well, you are absolutely in the right place. Today, we're totally dismantling the illusion of rushing. We're going to look at why moving at breakneck speed might actually be the exact thing holding you back from true, lasting achievement.
So, why exactly does rushing push success further away? I mean, think about your own daily life and the stress of wanting results like yesterday. We push, we panic, we exhaust ourselves trying to find shortcuts. But what if that desperate impatience is literally building a brick wall between you and your ultimate goals? What if that frantic energy we think is helping us is actually blinding us to the very steps we need to take?
Okay, let's dive into this. Chapter 5 of our source text makes a profound, unbreakable connection between our ability to wait, to endure, and our ultimate capacity to succeed. It really challenges the whole foundation of how we measure progress in our fast-paced society. The core argument here: walking patiently is actually the only genuine path forward.
Now, to truly grasp this, we're looking at a text rooted in deep, ancient spiritual wisdom. What we're exploring today isn't some trendy new productivity hack or corporate life hack. It's a radical, timeless shift in how the human mind views progress. It speaks directly to the soul, and honestly, it reminds us that these enduring teachings are probably more relevant today than they've ever been.
So we have to completely redefine impatience. It's not just that quirky little personality flaw where you tap your foot in a long line at the grocery store. No, the source material defines it as a deep, dangerous attachment to time. It's this anxious desire to just grab the fruits of success without actually putting in the necessary sweat and effort. Basically, it's a toxic state of mind that keeps us trapped in an agonizing cycle of constant frustration.
Moving into part 1. The power of solitude. Take a deep breath. If impatience is the disease, what exactly is the cure? To fix this attachment to time, we have to enter what the text considers the necessary forge of true success. As the quote says, success is always preceded by a period of solitude. Now, in our hyper-connected, social media-driven world, we're usually terrified of being alone. We view loneliness as a failure, right? Like a sign that we've been left behind. But this wisdom reframes it entirely. Solitude isn't a punishment, it's the crucible. It's the absolutely crucial environment where the soul is tempered and real resilience is built. Look at the contrast here. On one side, we have the constant seeking of noise and the immediate praise of the crowd. Sure, it feels good in the moment, but it's incredibly fleeting. On the other side, we have the quiet test of isolation. The source material points out that enduring this isolation, sometimes for 10 or 20 years of quiet, unrecognized effort, is what profoundly grows the soul. It's literally the difference between a quick flash in the pan and an enduring, brilliant flame.
And this brilliantly illustrates a beautiful paradox. You are never truly alone in your solitude. The teachings assure us that in these moments of quiet, unseen effort, when you might feel the most isolated, you're actually accompanied by a greater presence. This is the exact moment the soul prepares to emit its own brilliant, profound light. The darkness of solitude? Well, it's really just the necessary backdrop for your eventual illumination.
And that brings us to part 2, the poison of jealousy. So what happens when that light finally does begin to shine? When all your hard work starts paying off? Well, there's a severe warning here about false success and how shockingly fast hard-earned progress can be destroyed if we aren't careful. Success built on rushing, or stepping on others, or brute force, it naturally provokes envy. It creates endless conflict and instability. The text warns that decades of hard work can vanish like a bubble if it gets poisoned by jealousy. But true success, the kind forged in patient solitude, that brings deep peace, and it actually earns the gratitude of the people around you, rather than their resentment.
So how do we guarantee we're building the right kind of success? True success cultivates a calm, peaceful mind. It broadens your perspective so you genuinely care for others. It acts as an antidote, a sort of protective virtue, born entirely out of patient effort that actively avoids triggering other people's jealousy. And finally, it naturally earns respect, because true success is never, ever achieved at the expense of others.
Let's move to the climax of today's explainer. Part 3, Taming the Inner Giant. To achieve this piece, the text offers an unforgettable allegory. Picture a terrifying 2.5-meter-tall giant rampaging through a small village. He has the strength of horses, he's tearing apart houses, and he's causing extreme fear among the villagers. Now, this giant is a metaphor. He represents our own inner, uncontrollable desires, our ego, and that rough, destructive impatience we talked about earlier. Let's be honest, we all have this giant inside us, especially when we're stuck in rush hour traffic or dealing with incredibly slow Wi-Fi. It's the raw chaos inside all of us. So how do you stop such a massive, destructive force? The villagers tried hiding. They locked their doors in pure terror, but their fear couldn't stop the giant's brute force. But then, a tiny, 5-year-old boy steps up, and he doesn't bring a weapon. He brings a grass flute. And he just begins playing a simple, soothing, gentle melody.
Hearing the grass flute, the giant shed large tears. He was tamed not by force, but by a nostalgic sound. The giant literally wept large drops of tears. He wasn't beaten into submission or violently suppressed. Instead, he was reminded of harmony. The text is telling us that extreme suppression and punishing asceticism, they just aren't the answers to our inner turmoil.
So, the crucial point is this. To master your own chaotic impulses, the text outlines 3 specific steps. First, you must acknowledge the rough giant. Your desires and impatience exist, so don't ignore them. Second, avoid extreme asceticism or trying to use brute force to suppress how you feel. Third, you must play the grass flute. By that, it means you must intentionally cultivate ordinary, daily compassion and harmony. That is how you truly control your chaotic impulses.
The true sound of enlightenment isn't found in rigid, punishing suffering. It's not found in beating yourself up because you aren't succeeding fast enough. Actually, scratch that. It's really found in the peaceful, steady harmony of everyday life. Small, consistent acts of compassion and patience are what truly soothe the giant of our impatience.
Which leaves us with this final, vital question. What melody will you play to soothe your inner giant today? Before you rush towards your next goal, before you let impatience completely dictate your day, just take a breath. Find your solitude. Remember that true success brings peace, and play your grass flute. Thank you so much for joining me in this explainer. I really hope this journey has brought you some clarity today, and I'll see you next time. Welcome to the explainer. Today, we're unpacking a spiritual concept that might just completely change how you view your everyday life.
If you've ever wondered how certain spiritual texts map out the journey of the soul beyond just a single lifetime, well, you're absolutely in the right place. We're going to look closely at how this specific philosophy structures the universe, the afterlife, and the deep, eternal purpose of human existence exactly as it's detailed in our source material. Our foundational text today is a fascinating book titled The Rebirth of Buddha. And for this explainer, we're zeroing right in on its core philosophical argument about the journey of the soul, which is laid out in Chapter 6. This isn't just a light read, it's a massive, comprehensive spiritual framework. The author presents a highly structured view of existence, one that fundamentally challenges the way modern society usually thinks about life, death, and what might actually come next.
The author sets up this incredible tension right out of the gate. They observe that modern, earthly common sense has pretty much completely dismissed the idea of eternal life. The text points out that, for a lot of people today, reincarnation is just seen as an outdated myth, a mere parable, or, even a joke from the past. The source argues that modern society has essentially traded this grand, eternal perspective for a highly temporary, materialistic one.
So, that leads us to a profound question that the author tackles head-on. What do we actually lose when we stop believing in the continuous cycle of the soul? According to the text, forgetting our eternal nature isn't just some harmless cultural shift. It completely alters human values. It changes how we treat each other, how we handle suffering, and ultimately, how we view our entire purpose.
To figure out why, let's dive right into Chapter 6, What is Reincarnation?
Okay, let's lay down the foundation here. The text specifically defines reincarnation not as some random, chaotic rebirth into different life forms, but as a highly deliberate, eternal process of spiritual evolution and training. In this view, humans possess eternal life and are reborn repeatedly between this physical world and the real spiritual world. Earth is essentially framed as a rigorous training ground. Think of it less like a cosmic waiting room and more like a gym for your soul to accumulate necessary lessons.
This brings us to Section 1, Defending Human Dignity and a Major Clash of Perspectives.
Building on that definition of reincarnation, the author passionately defends human dignity by contrasting two very distinct views. On one hand, you have a purely materialistic view of earthly evolution, the idea that humans are basically just a collection of matter that happened to evolve from amoebas. But on the other hand, there's the spiritual view. Humans possess eternal souls that were purposefully created by the Buddha. The author really challenges the reader to consider which of these perspectives actually honors the depth and complexity of human life.
According to the source, dismissing reincarnation isn't just taking a scientific or intellectual stance. It is a complete and total rejection of the spiritual foundation of existence. The text explicitly states that denying the eternal soul means denying the mind of the Buddha and the very humans created by that divine force. It's framed as the ultimate loss of spiritual memory.
Moving to Section 2, Mechanics of the Afterlife. Where exactly does the soul go?
So, if we are eternal, how does this transition actually work once we leave the physical body? Well, the text asserts a very stark division upon entering the afterlife. Over there, your earthly status, your bank account, your intellect, they mean absolutely nothing. Your destination is strictly determined by your spiritual state. Those who cultivated a high mind ascend to heavenly realms of peace and joy. Conversely, those with a low mind, meaning people harboring negativity and unresolved earthly suffering, descend to lower realms of suffering, which are often referred to as hell.
When describing these lower realms, the author outlines a reality that is intensely confronting. In a really surprising twist, the text explains that our physical bodies actually act as a sort of shock absorber. Once the soul transitions and is stripped of that protective numbness, it must acutely feel the direct vibrations of the pain and sorrow it caused others during its earthly life. You are essentially harvesting the negative karma you created, and any unresolved worries or sufferings are carried straight over into the next world with you. That intense reality leads to Section 3, the 180-degree shift and transforming your value system.
Realizing how uncompromising these afterlife mechanics are is meant to prompt a total 180-degree shift in how we view our existence. It opens up a much broader timeline for the soul's journey. You have your present physical training on Earth. Then, the transition of passing away, where you are judged solely by your state of mind. After that, the text states you spend hundreds of years, centuries really, living in the real spiritual world in whichever realm you've earned. And finally, in the future, you reincarnate back to Earth for your next set of lessons.
Which takes us to Section 4, Carrying Over Earthly Lessons and Why Your Present Mind is So Crucial.
Because of this continuous unbreakable loop, how we manage our minds today, right now, is absolutely critical. To ensure a positive transition, the text lays out strict actionable steps, calling them the first conditions of enlightenment. We're instructed to study Buddhist truth, actively control our thoughts, and critically, to overcome and cut off our earthly worries right now. The whole goal is to live righteously so that when the time comes, your mind is prepared to leave the physical body with joy and peace, rather than dragging a bunch of regret and suffering with you.
What's truly fascinating here is how this framework completely redefines our difficult earthly experiences. The text insists that nothing you go through is just pointless suffering. Instead, every single challenge is a crucial lesson that builds your soul's capacity. The perseverance and wisdom you gain through life's training down here will actively serve you in your spiritual training in the centuries to come in the next world.
And finally, Section 5, the eternal treasure. Your spiritual fruits are never wasted. This brings us to a highly comforting conclusion regarding all of our spiritual labor. In a world where physical things just inevitably decay, the text assures the reader that spiritual enlightenment, your efforts, the hard-earned lessons you've gained in this life, none of that is ever wasted. They don't just disappear when the physical body dies. Instead, they become an eternal treasure. This spiritual wealth permanently elevates the soul, embedding itself deep within the soul's memory and guiding your evolution across all of your future lives and incarnations.
As we wrap up this explainer, we want to leave you with a pretty massive thought to chew on, derived directly from the source's philosophy. If this text is right, if your current daily state of mind is actively dictating the reality you will inhabit for the next several centuries in the spiritual realm, what thoughts exactly are you choosing to harvest today? It's a powerful framework for self-reflection, urging all of us to look a little deeper at our inner lives. Thanks so much for learning with us today.
Hey everyone, welcome to today's explainer. If you've ever found yourself wondering about the actual nuts and bolts mechanics of what happens before, during, and after our time on Earth, well, you are definitely in the right place. Today, we're going to systematically unpack the profound teachings on eternal life found in our source material, breaking down some pretty complex esoteric concepts into clear, digestible pieces. We're diving straight into Chapter 6 of Ryuho Okawa's esoteric book, Buddha's Reincarnation. And let me tell you, this text doesn't just offer up vague philosophy. No, it lays out a comprehensive, almost mechanical system of how the soul operates across multiple lifetimes. We're literally looking at what the author presents as the fundamental truth of human existence, looking directly at the rules that supposedly govern our entire spiritual evolution.
Right out of the gate, the author hits the reader with this incredibly provocative claim. He essentially says, hey, do you remember my voice? You must have heard me speak in India. You've been born with me on Earth over thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of years. It completely flips the script. You aren't just a blank slate. According to the text, you're an ancient soul being reawakened. It's a bold starting point that demands we completely reevaluate our understanding of ourselves.
To wrap our heads around all these vast cosmic concepts, here is our roadmap for today. 1. The forgotten truth. 2. Architecture of the afterlife. 3. The law of karma. 4. Mastering the mind. And 5. The eternal treasure.
Okay, let's jump right into Section 1, the forgotten truth. The core argument here is that modern society has, quite frankly, abandoned the concept of reincarnation. But Chapter 6 is super clear. This isn't some comforting myth or a nice metaphor. It's presented as the absolute, undeniable engine of human existence. We possess eternal life, and we are constantly cycling between the physical world and the spiritual realm for one deliberate purpose: to evolve our souls. But the author points out, with a lot of lament, actually, how earthly common sense, modern education, and even a lot of contemporary religious authorities just treat the idea of past lives as a joke today. A total fairy tale. And the source material argues that by denying this continuous cycle, we are fundamentally denying human dignity. We're reducing an eternal, magnificent creation of the Buddha to just a temporary material accident. Moving right along to Section 2, Architecture of the Afterlife. So if the soul truly is eternal, what exactly are the mechanics of the world it enters when the physical body dies? Well, the text asserts that the afterlife is strictly divided based entirely on your internal spiritual state, your mind. All that earthly status, the wealth you accumulated, your physical success, totally irrelevant. Heaven is characterized as a high spiritual state of enlightenment, while hell is defined as a low state, governed completely by those unchecked worldly desires and negative emotions you didn't resolve while you were alive.
But it's not just a simple option A or option B. The spiritual world is composed of dozens, maybe even infinite, highly specific layers. It's like the ultimate precision sorting system. You don't just go to a generic heaven or hell. You are sorted with absolute precision by your exact spiritual frequency. The text even notes that these fine divisions are so incredibly complex that the spirits currently living there barely understand the full extent of it.
Which brings us perfectly to Section 3, the law of karma.
How does a soul actually get pulled into those lower frequencies? The text outlines a very clear, terrifying, but perfectly logical four-step progression. First, while we're on Earth, we develop strong attachments and cause harm. But our physical body acts like a buffer, making us spiritually blind or numb to the damage we're doing to our own soul. Second, physical death happens, and boom, that buffer is gone. Third, without the body, all that unresolved suffering and anger instantly surfaces. And finally, because the spiritual realm sorts strictly by frequency, that heavy, negative state actively drags the soul right down into the hell realm.
The text puts it so intensely, stating that the suffering and grief you cause others revives in your soul, and your soul itself feels the vibration of hell. Because you're stripped of that physical numbness, you feel the pain you caused with excruciating sensitivity. It's not some judge handing down a punishment. It's you creating your own hellish reality based on your own past actions. You literally reap exactly what you've sown, felt at the deepest vibrational level.
All right, that's heavy. Let's look at Section 4, Mastering the Mind. Knowing that negative earthly actions guarantee a lower vibration later, what are we supposed to do right now? Well, we aren't left without a defense. The ultimate safeguard, according to the text, is using spiritual truth to actively master your mind. We need to study Buddhist truth, discipline our emotions, overcome daily anxieties, and live righteously without heavy attachments. Basically, you're building an internal compass that points your frequency directly away from those lower realms.
The book really hammers home that the vast majority of our mistakes stem from unchecked emotional reactions, acting out of anger, jealousy, or greed. But gaining correct spiritual knowledge gives you the actual power to rule those passions. It's not just academic philosophy for passing a test, it's a practical, vital toolkit for keeping your spiritual frequency high in the middle of a chaotic life. And that leads us to our final part, Section 5, the eternal treasure. All of this rigorous mind management serves a massive purpose in the grand scheme of things. The text describes a fascinating timeline. The soul uses the relatively short, rigorous, and painful environment of Earth for intense training. Then it transitions to the afterlife to reflect on that life for hundreds of years. Once that reflection is done, the soul is reborn as a baby to tackle brand new spiritual challenges. It is a continuous, incredible loop of action and reflection. And here is the really crucial point. The effort you put into studying the truth, controlling your anger, and living righteously today, it isn't just to make today slightly better. The text promises that the enlightenment and lessons you gain are never wasted. They cross the boundary of physical death. They become a permanent, eternal treasure, literally described as an indestructible diamond that actively aids your soul's evolution in your future lives. It's the ultimate long-term investment.
Understanding this profound 180-degree shift in how we view our existence leaves us with a really powerful reflection. If we accept this framework, that we are indeed eternal beings cycling through this precise spiritual architecture, we have to ask ourselves, are you currently packing heavy worldly attachments that are going to drag you down? Or are you cultivating eternal treasures of the mind that will elevate you in your next life? Thanks so much for joining me in this explainer today. Keep questioning, keep learning, and I'll catch you in the next one.
Okay, listen to this quote. Losing faith is worse than losing your life. Doubt is the realm of demons. That is an incredibly stark, dramatic ultimatum, right? Imagine being told that your actual physical survival is secondary to your absolute unwavering belief. Well, that is exactly the premise we're exploring today.
Welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we're analyzing a highly uncompromising piece of theology. We're zooming in specifically on Chapter 7 of Ryuho Okawa's foundational text, The Rebirth of Buddha. We'll be taking a neutral look at its core argument, which is the absolute necessity of faith in the fundamental Buddha, and how that ties directly into creating a literal utopia on Earth. And the structure of this argument is just a fascinating journey. It takes us from the massive scale of the cosmos straight down into your living room.
So, here is our roadmap for today. We're covering 5 key areas. 1. Cosmic faith. 2.
demonic doubt. 3, earthly attachments. 4, arrogance. And finally, number 5, the family utopia.
Let's jump right into Section 1, Cosmic Faith, the object of devotion. We're starting with the outermost ring here. Looking at the title of Chapter 7, Faith and the Path to Building the Buddha Land, the source makes it entirely clear that these two concepts are inextricably linked. The argument is that building a utopia is simply impossible without deep gratitude and reverence for the fundamental Buddha who rules the universe, alongside the high-level spirits guiding humanity. Recognizing this spiritual hierarchy is laid out as the absolute prerequisite for any kind of earthly progress.
And here is where the text sets its firmest boundary. Belief cannot be partial. It requires 100% commitment. According to the source, practitioners have to possess absolute certainty in the teachings. There is literally zero room for hesitation, no space for taking a wait-and-see approach. You're either entirely united with the teachings, or you're not on the path at all.
Which brings us to Section 2, Demonic Doubt, the Danger of Suspicion. Because, think about it, if 100% faith is required, what happens when that faith cracks? Even just a little bit? Well, the text treats doubt as an existential threat. It claims that even a tiny seed of suspicion opens an immediate doorway for demonic forces to enter. Malevolent entities are supposedly actively looking for these exact cracks to infiltrate a practitioner's mind, pit people against one another, and just breed division.
The phrasing here is exact, and it's pretty severe. Doubt is the mind of demons. The text asserts that true spiritual inquiry is never rooted in suspicion or fear. If you begin to harbor cynical suspicion, the teachings dictate that you are no longer considered a spiritual practitioner. You've completely stepped off the path and breached the demonic realm.
Moving along to Section 3, Earthly Attachments, Prioritizing the Eternal.
So you might be wondering, if absolute cosmic faith is mandatory, how does a believer navigate everyday human desires? The text presents a totally non-negotiable scale here. On one side, you have earthly values, status, honor, money, romance, and on the other, the eternal soul. The mandate is strict. The eternal soul and unwavering faith must always win out, no exceptions. The source emphasizes this with a really dramatic claim. A believer should never abandon their faith for the sake of their job, for immense wealth, or even for the affections of a spouse. The text states unequivocally that nothing is heavier than faith, and that choosing a life firmly united with the teachings is the only correct path, regardless of the earthly sacrifices you might have to make. Next up is Section 4, Arrogance, the ultimate enemy. Now, even if someone successfully sheds all those earthly attachments we just talked about, there's still an internal vulnerability that the text calls the greatest enemy of a practitioner, manshin, or arrogance. The source warns that you could serve faithfully for 40 years, but if arrogance takes hold in your final year, your training is completely ruined. It's portrayed as the ultimate spiritual saboteur, capable of reducing decades of discipline to absolutely nothing in a single night. The prescribed antidote to this poison? Constant humility. The text urges readers to actively recognize their own immaturity and their smallness in the universe. To defeat arrogance, the source says a practitioner must continue walking the path with a heart overflowing with gratitude, staying humble no matter how advanced their training might seem to be. And finally, Section 5, the family utopia, starting at home. Okay, so up until now, we've been dealing with massive cosmic stakes, right? Demonic realms, destroying the ego, the eternal soul. But right here, the text makes a deeply grounded, surprising pivot. Building the Buddha land, a true utopia on Earth, is not fundamentally about grand global politics. The first vital step actually begins right at the kitchen table, within the four walls of the family home. The logic used here is incredibly pragmatic. A vast nation of 100 million people is ultimately just a collection of tiny individual units. Therefore, the argument goes, if you want to change society, you have to start by raising children with love and Buddhist truth. The entire foundation of a new world is built on creating harmonious households of 4 or 5 people at a time. And check out this truly climactic statistic. The text states that cultivating a harmonious family home constitutes a staggering 90% of the work required to build an earthly utopia. Only the remaining 10% is left to external, worldly efforts. Your home life isn't a distraction from your spiritual mission, it is the overwhelming majority of it. And the text draws a very firm boundary here.
It strictly warns against getting swept up in the illusion of grand worldly ambition. If you neglect your spouse or your kids under the guise of saving the world or performing important external work, the source states that you completely disqualify yourself as a practitioner. True harmony cannot exist out there in the world if you've abandoned it inside your own house.
So, we've journeyed from the necessity of 100% cosmic faith to the dire warnings of demonic doubt, through the traps of worldly attachment and arrogance, only to arrive right back home. The Source presents a really fascinating paradox. The path to reshaping the entire universe is walked almost entirely within our own homes, which leaves us with a pretty compelling question. If building a worldly utopia truly requires prioritizing the eternal over the earthly, is the ultimate spiritual test simply how we treat our own families behind closed doors? It's a profound thought to take away from this explainer, and one that completely reframes the concept of spiritual duty.